In a village one winter, in the bleak and the chill, stood a crumbly old building called Peppercorn Mill. The arms of the windmill were stuck in the frost, as the landscape around it lay frozen and still. In the house lived the Millers, a family of 3, a mother, a father, and their daughter Kaylee. Old Mr. Miller was grumpy and sour. His wife, small and nervous, shrieked every hour as the grandfather clock by the stone fireplace bellowed his chime through his timely old face. Kaylee was a quiet girl who enjoyed reading and crafts, and her kind face lit up at the touch of her laugh. But it had been a tough winter at Peppercorn Mill. The wind had not blown, the air was too still. The mill cannot grind without the wind power, and if it can't grind, they cannot make flour. But one wintry day, through the drizzle so dreary, a little mouse wandered, weathered and weary. He blinked through the fog, after rambling through haze and wondering about the meaning of all of his days. And he shivered and shook in the frozen air, climbed onto an icy branch, and there, out in the distance, in front of the hills, he saw the tall and towering Peppercorn Mill. And just as he saw it, oh what a sight! A rainbow, the colours, the shining sunlight! He hurried and scurried and skittered along, but when he got closer the rainbow was gone, for the sun got too bright and the colours did fade, and the little mouse was left in the coolness of shade. But the mouse looked up at the strange old house and decided to stay. What a home for a mouse! So he crept inside and settled himself down, and hoped for the moment when he could look up into the deep blue sky and see those beautiful colours again. Inside the mill were rooms so small, with creaky old doors and crumbling walls, with chambers inside where brick dust fell, the perfect place for a mouse to dwell. So he settled on in, and as time withered on, the little mouse found a new place to belong. The spring sprung to life with a song and a breeze that danced through the air and hummed through the trees, and guided the sails of the old mill to turn so the grinders inside could chumble and churn and grind all the kernels down through the mill tower, and the millers resumed business by selling the flour. As the spring scampered onward, the mill kept its beat. Mrs. Miller fed the family with bread and baked treats. The mouse fed himself by sneaking little crumbs that got left in the kitchen when baking was done. Then one day, a Sunday, the mouse was too brazen when he saw on the counter a cake filled with raisins. He glanced past the kitchen to the family room, where Mrs. Miller was sweeping the floor with a broom, while her grouchy old husband was napping and snoring, and Kaylee was quietly reading a story. The mouse saw the family was looking away from the cake that lay on the china tea tray. So softly he crept on his little mouse feet from the hole in the wall toward the scrumptious treat. Mrs. Miller screeched with fear and with shock as mean Mr. Miller grabbed a cast iron pot. He waved it and shook it and yelled with a passion, while poor Mrs. Miller's pale face turned ashen, and the pot came down with a thud through the air, and the little mouse dodged it by the breadth of a hair. Gentle Kaylee tried to calm down her father, saying, "No, Papa, no, he won't be a bother. He doesn't mean harm, please don't hurt him." And her father just yelled, "He's not welcome, he's vermin." But the mouse made it back to the wall where he cowered in the velvety darkness as Mr. Miller glowered. And he knew they were talking about him. He heard them say "mouse" again and again. And deep down inside, he lost all sense of doubt, for the first time in his life, as he thought I am Mouse. Mouse hid in the corner of Kaylee's bedroom. He stayed still and quiet as he peeked through the broom that she kept in the corner for sweeping her floor. She was such a good girl, always did her chores. Kaylee walked over to a dark wooden chest in which all her craft kits were hidden in rest. She shuffled through boxes and large spools of cotton till she spotted something down at the bottom. Mouse watched her bring the box into the light, revealing inside a most wondrous sight. It was filled to the brim with hundreds of beads in all different colors, the colors he'd seen in the rainbow that day, the colors, the thrill, the colors that led him to Peppercorn Mill. He watched intently as Kaylee held some twine and threaded on beads in a colorful line. Mouse felt in his heart a perfect desire, a true sense of purpose for the very first time. He wanted to create the rainbow again, just for himself, something of his own. For to build his own dream and have his own rainbow, well, then he'd be really and truly at home. As nighttime woke up and silenced the day, the tired little girl put her beading away. In the dark, in the stillness, in her blankets she slept, and over the floorboards the silver glow crept. And Mouse saw it there by the light of the moon, a shiny red bead, all alone in the room. He scurried out to it with glee and delight, guided by the moon in a sliver of light, and rolled it right back to the hole in the wall, and fell fast asleep with the bead in his paws. The days flowed by and the seasons pulled forward, as spring turned to summer and life became warmer. The wind blew steady, the mill kept its power, and the millers made good money selling their flour. Little Kaylee still played with her beads, and Mouse followed carefully, hoping she'd leave the beads out at night. But she put them away when she was done playing at the end of the day. Then one night, what luck! He noticed there in the living room, next to the comfy armchair, a bright orange bead, all shiny and new, the color of pumpkins and autumn leaves too. He wanted that small orange bead for his own, so he took it on back to his little mouse home, where he placed it right next to the bead of bright red, and with joy and contentment, he rested his head. One day, Mrs. Miller stepped in from outside, whistling a tune, carrying a bounty with pride, a basket of corn overflowing and fresh. Mouse was so excited he got up from his rest. He remembered a time as a young baby mouse, before he was lucky enough to live in a house, when he slept tucked inside a large ear of corn between the leaf and the kernels to keep himself warm. He saw Mrs. Miller pick up a large knife and shear the corn into a bowl, but one of the kernels missed and it fell and it flew and it bounced and it rolled till it landed by Mouse and reminded him of the beads that he had been holding. The corn was a color he hadn't yet found, a beautiful sunshiny golden. He carefully picked up the corn in his teeth and tasted the juice so delicious and sweet, then placed it by his beads of orange and red, hidden away by his little mouse bed. It was just 1 week later, on a warm summer night, when Mouse found himself in a lucky delight, when he saw on the ground 2 rounded beads, one a sky blue and the other grass green. So out he did creep, with hushed little feet, careful not to wake the young girl fast asleep. Quickly he took the green bead to the hole, but returning for the blue bead was perhaps too bold. Just as he placed his paw on the bead, in through the window came a cool, heavy breeze that knocked off a book from the window ledge and onto poor Mouse, who found himself wedged between the book and the ground. So he wiggled around and finally, painfully pulled himself out, miraculously, with the bead in his mouth. And the days flowed by and the village changed colour as autumn set in and pushed out the summer. The weather turned brisk, with fewer light hours, but the wind still blew steady and the mill kept its power. Many weeks passed and Mouse found no beads, though he found his quiet days still peppered with dreams of hope and of colours he once saw in the sky. He wondered about life and would watch with a sigh from the window on days that Kaylee went to class. He'd gaze at the trees and ponder the grass. He began to get tired as days became colder, for even little mice have to get older. And as the autumn leaves became crispy and free, old Mrs. Miller was as joyed as can be. She sang and she hummed with glee and with cheer, because harvest time was her favourite time of year. For the village harvest festival, she baked from sunrise, making cakes, making breads, making seasonal pies. Mouse watched from the corner as she kneaded and pulled, and she baked until her baskets were brimming and full. Several weeks passed in which Mouse found no beads, though he searched every night when the millers went to sleep. He loved all his treasures, the 4 beads and corn, but his rainbow wasn't finished. He needed 2 more. So one rainy night, he finally chose to take matters into his own paws, and as the family dozed, he looked out from the bristles of the prickly old broom, and after checking it was clear, flitted across the room and climbed up the leg of the table to see the box in which Kaylee kept all her beads. It was a smooth plastic case with a lid that slides off. Through the transparent cover, he saw into the box. Mouse stood on the lid and looked down past his feet to see beads upon beads in all colours beneath. He pushed the lid over and away from the box. The only other sound in the room was the clock, as it tocked and it ticked, counting the seconds that each brought him closer to the colours that beckoned. Mouse rummaged and found one, a colour he was missing. A lovely and shiny deep indigo glistened. So he quietly picked up the bead in his mouth. But then Kaylee stirred and woke up and called out, "Who's there? What's that?" She turned on the light. Mouse just froze and dropped his bead in fright. Then he jumped and he ran desperately fast. "Oh, it's the mouse," Kaylee quietly gasped. "I'm sorry, little mouse, if you found me too scary. You were stealing this bead? How extraordinary." "Well, that's quite all right. I've plenty of these." And she carefully picked up his indigo bead and placed it by the hole in which he did hide, and watched with a smile as he took it inside. He placed the indigo bead next to the others and softly gathered his staggering breath. All that he needed was one final colour, but first he lay down to rest. The days whistled by and the winds brought a frost as the winter moved in and autumn was lost. The mill kept its power, though grinding was slower, and Mouse, too, became tired. His whiskers drooped lower. It had been a long time since he'd found any beads, as Kaylee had been careful to tidy her things. So Mouse spent his days feeling worn but fulfilled, remembering his adventures at Peppercorn Mill. But one day in December, he awoke to the sound of Kaylee's happy squeals. He explored and then found that the millers had brought in a very large tree and adorned it with colours so beautifully. The family put streamers and candles round the room, and the evergreen scent became a subtle perfume. When the house fell to quiet and the family slept, Mouse seized his chance. First he crept, then ran to the tree, so dramatic and tall, it was so much bigger than it seemed from the wall. He felt joy for the colors and joy for the chance to have had such adventure, and he climbed to the branch where the violet was waiting, just dangling there, with pine all around and wishes in the air. As he crawled near the edge, the branch took his weight, as it dipped and it bowed, then eventually made a delicate pop as the bauble dropped. Mouse hurried down and scurried to see the color he'd earned in a giant shiny bead. He lifted his paws and placed them upon the cool, glassy surface of the prize he had won. He then saw himself in violet reflection and felt nothing but joy for his color collection. Quietly he pulled it and tugged it and rolled, and the bauble just barely fit through the hole. But he pushed it to just where it needed to go, next to his colors, all in a row. Red, orange, yellow and green, blue, indigo and violet too. It only took time and hope and a dream, but the rainbow was his. His wish became true. Mouse became tired and lay down in ease right next to his rainbow of colors and dreams. And the tiredness crept over his little mouse form as the happiness inside him felt humble and warm. And then, as the stillness washed through his mind, colors turned to darkness as Mouse closed his eyes. Outside, the wind slowed to a restful chill, and Peppercorn Mill was quiet and still.